Hi there everyone, welcome to this video where we're going to be discussing Descartes' dualism, or Cartesian dualism, as I've written up on the board here. Descartes' dualism is one of the features of his philosophy that is the most well known, and although we'll talk about this more over the course of the whole video, it basically amounts to the view that there are two classes of finite substances, minds and bodies, and that they have essentially different natures. To really understand what Descartes means by this point, and also why he maintains it in the Meditations, in this video we're going to discuss some essential terminology for Descartes' philosophy, as well as his reasons for believing that minds and bodies are two essentially distinct kinds of substances. In the next video, where we're going to discuss Cartesian interactionism, we're going to discuss Descartes' account of the fact that we are a human being. That is, that we are not only our minds or our souls for Descartes, but we also inhabit a physical body. And understanding that fact is partially made difficult by the stringency of Descartes' dualism and how fundamentally distinct he understands minds and bodies to be. Let's start out by establishing some basic terminology, namely substances and modes or modifications. We can define substances are that in which modifications inhere. That might sound like a very abstract definition, but we are going to clarify it in just one moment. Modifications, Descartes also uses the terminology modes or affections, are changing features of a substance. So let's pause for a moment and go over to some examples that I have on this side of the board. Descartes gives, in especially the second meditation, an analysis of two examples of substances that he actually regards to be essentially distinct. And these take place in the wax example, which we discussed at some length last week, as well as the cogito argument, which is also something that we've discussed at length in a previous video. Descartes' point with the wax example was that when he perceives the candle while it is lit, it has a number of features or qualities with respect to it. It's hot, it's smelly, it's tall, and so on. Then he falls asleep and wakes up and he finds that the candle is no longer lit. It's now cold, for example, and it's odorless and it's changed its shape, and so on. These are various kinds of changes that we say belong to or changes of the wax. In other words, those changes inhere within the wax. The wax is a substance, and these changes are various kinds of modes or modifications that the substance undergoes. Quite similarly, we can use the exact same structure, namely of substance and modifications, to understand the cogito argument, or to understand the nature of a mind. So Descartes thinks that when we have a stream of consciousness and we have various kinds of ideas, that all of those ideas are ideas of, or ideas that inhere within a substance, that substance being your mind, right? And it's because every idea makes an implicit reference to its substance as that which is undergoing the modification, that the cogito is sort of implicitly present within all of our ideas, right? There's an implicit reference back to the mind of the thinker that contains every thought. Now, what we can see here is a direct analogy. there are changes or modifications, and there is the thing that is changed, or the thing in which all of those changes inhere, and that is the substance. Descartes' dualism is the view that there are two classes of finite substances, bodies and mind, that have essentially distinct natures. So the way that a mental substance, a mind, is set up is different in kind from the way that an extended substance or a body is organized as well. And Descartes thinks that by means of the arguments that he's discovered in the Meditations, that he can demonstrate this point and point to some fundamental differences in the structure of these substances. Let's now go through the bottom half of the board. For Descartes, bodies are paradigmatically known through the imagination. What does that mean? Well, it means that if you know about the existence of something within physical nature, the way that you come to know it is through the senses. It's through your ability to create an image in your mind of it, right? Your sensory perceptual capabilities. By contrast, minds are known through the understanding or through the application of necessary rules. It's going to turn out because of this that our knowledge of bodies is always at least somewhat unclear and indistinct, whereas our knowledge of minds at least can be maximally clear and distinct. Bodies are what Descartes calls extended substances. So in other words, they are physical beings. They take up a certain amount of space and there are a certain kind of shape, right? So for example, this water bottle, right? This water bottle has a certain shape. It occupies a space that another object cannot occupy without moving it aside, right? These are aspects of it as a physical body that would be examined and studied in physics, for example. Descartes is going to learn a lot about the world from the fact that he thinks that physical bodies are extended substances. So we're going to continue to unpack this claim throughout this video and also into the next video. By contrast, minds are, for Descartes, thinking substances. Res cogitans versus res extensa. So unlike bodies, minds are not located within space or time. Minds don't take up space, right? Your brain, for example, is a physical body that takes up space. But for Descartes, that's different from your mind, which is a non-physical thing that does not take up physical space, although he does think that there's an essential relationship between your mind and your brain. This will be a central topic for discussion for our next video. Now, it follows from what we've said about bodies and minds that bodies are mathematically structured. Or Descartes could say, just as much as Galileo, that mathematics is the language in which the book of nature is written. There's a reason for why we can create mathematical models of physical interactions. And that's because bodies are essentially kind of mathematical entities. And here's what I mean by that. I mean that if bodies are defined as being extended substances, as taking up a determinate amount of space, then it follows that we can quantify that space. So for example, in examining my water bottle, my premier example of a extended substance, I can measure, for example, how tall it is, how much this divots inward, and so on, right? And therefore, I can come to have a more and more clear and distinct idea of this body. Of course, I will never know it as good as I know the mathematical facts, like 2 + 2 = 4, but through the application of the methods of mathematics to bodies, I come to have an ever more clear and distinct knowledge of them. By contrast, minds are, for Descartes, indivisible. Minds have no parts, minds cannot be divided, and they cannot, on Descartes' account, be created or destroyed. You can give an account of how this water bottle as a physical object came into being. Namely, it was composed of certain raw materials that were then composed together to form the water bottle as we know it. For Descartes, there are no parts of the mind in the same way. You can't divide the mind up into its parts and try to explain the existence of the mind from the nature of those parts. Moreover, this means that the mind cannot, on Descartes' account, be created or destroyed. Right? You can't bring materials together to create a mind, and you can't destroy a mind, right? You can destroy a physical body, you can't destroy a mind. This is part of Descartes' reason. He believes that in proving the necessary existence of the mind, and proving that minds are by nature indivisible, he's proven the existence of a soul. Namely, he's proven the existence of something that survives through the deaths of our bodies. And because minds cannot be naturally created or destroyed, he can only posit God as their creator. Now, bodies are governed exclusively by what we could call efficient causal or mechanical causality. Think, for example, of a watch. And thinkers of this period really loved clocks and watches. And they often used clocks and watches as an analogy for the whole universe. So you might have heard, for example, that we live in a clockwork universe. We live in a universe governed by necessary laws of nature. That's an idea that was basically discovered or proposed by the scientific revolution and the philosophical aftermath of that revolution in early modern philosophy. Now, what does efficient cause or mechanical causality mean? It means that it's referring to the kind of causality where, for example, one billiard ball smashes into another, and that collision of the billiard balls causes them to move in certain ways on the billiards table, as it were. Or think, for example, about how gears mesh together in a watch or a clock, right? They are moving one another. They have a certain amount of force, right? That gets communicated from one to the next, and that makes it work in an exact and predictable fashion. So Descartes thought that this is ultimately how the physical universe worked, is that it was basically like a giant wound up watch, right? That is going to work in predictable, deterministic ways, and all we need to do is to increase our scientific knowledge of the laws of the universe and the application of those laws, and we can know essentially everything that we want to know about physical nature. By contrast, the mind is purposive, so it's aiming to achieve certain kinds of purposes, right? That's what human behavior does. I go to satellite, right, because I want a dirty chai or what have you, right? And it's also free, right? Descartes thinks that the mind is the cause of all of its own changes, right? The mind is not caused by anything external, right? And this is why our mistakes are our own and are not the fault of God, is because our ability to make free decisions is a feature of our mind. Now, Descartes is so radical about this view, especially his view about physical nature, that he has quotes like the following, where he'll say something like, "Give me matter and motion, and I will give you a universe," right? So in other words, all of the events that happen within the physical universe are entirely determined by laws of nature and then matter and motion. So laws of nature and then the initial conditions of the universe. And everything physical had to play out exactly how it did. And this is a sense in which we live in a clockwork universe, right? In the same way that the interior mechanisms of a clock or a watch produce predictable results, so too the universe is created by, we could say, the greatest watchmaker, the greatest clockmaker, and so on, right? And hence is fundamentally predictable. That means that there are no purposes in nature. There's not anything like what Aristotle thought that animal species, for example, had. Aristotle thought that animal species had forms that had specific kinds of purposes that physics couldn't explain on its own. You needed biology as an independent field. For Descartes, however, purposes don't explain anything in nature, right? So if you're trying to explain a physical event, for example, a comet, and you want to interpret that as trying to achieve some sort of purpose, as like a sign, right? Then you're wrong on Descartes' account. Similarly, if you think that there's any event that happens in the physical universe that's not law-like in nature, like a miracle, for example, you're wrong, right? A central part of Descartes' account. No purposes, no miracles. The mind, therefore, as something that is both free and purposive, is strictly speaking not a part of the physical world, right? We are a soul that is, for reasons that we will explore in our next video, somehow bound to a body. But we are not essentially this body. You might say that this is reflected in the fact that we say, I have a body, rather than I am a body. And it's because the mind contains all of mathematics as an innate idea, as a feature of our soul that God stamped in whenever He created us, that we are in a position to understand physical nature, namely through experimental, mathematical, natural science. What I really want to communicate in this video to you is that Descartes is really a radical, right? He's a radical in exactly the sense that he wants to take the explanatory model of Galilean physics and really claim that that has the ability to explain everything within physical nature. For this reason, sometimes Descartes is called a materialist or related to materialist philosophers, materialists being those who believe that you can explain everything through the means of natural science. And that's not fully wrong. But Descartes wanted to strike a really careful balance between what he saw as the real insights of natural science about how the universe worked with what he saw as important religious truths that came from the Christian tradition, namely the existence of our mind or soul and the free and undetermined nature of our mind with respect to that fully deterministic natural world. I hope that you found this video interesting. I very much look forward to hearing your thoughts and seeing you in the next video, where I will be discussing Cartesian interactionism. So you have a mind and you have a body. Now, how is it that our minds have an effect on bodies and bodies upon our minds? I look forward to seeing and talking with you then. Bye.